boxes, these things had instructions, but they were all in German, and nobody could read German. So they got an interpreter, and they figured out how to fix these Ascanias, and they progressed into a giant video camera that could score things and have the data ready for the pilot by the time they landed. Now, this was the business of shooting at things. It was a business of fusing missiles. It was a business of hitting airplanes. And Dad grew this into a very economical thing instead of a very people reading film thing, and it saved a lot of money and it saved a lot of time. And today when you watch a football game, you can see that ball when it's thrown, and that's from Dad's high-speed video patent that everybody can use from the Navy for free. People that used that were horse races. Olympic swimmers used that high-speed video. Several others, but one of the funnest things he did was they wanted him to help decide how fast a porpoise could swim. And there was a porpoise in San Diego they called Noddy the porpoise after Knott's China Lake. And Noddy's work was all very top secret. And Dad would go down there, and what his goal was, what they wanted him to do was videotape the laminar flow over the porpoise skin, because they were studying how fast these porpoises could go. And I don't know why they wanted to know how fast they go, but it was probably pretty gnarly what they wanted these porpoises to do. And Dad took his camera down there and got underwater, and he said, I can't see the porpoise. This is seawater. It's just too polluted. So they went way out to sea, and they got clear water, ocean water, filled it in a big ship that had a container, and they brought it back, and they filled Noddy's tank with crystal clear water, and Dad was able to do the test on Noddy. That was a big deal to us. During his time as a photographer, really, he was a photographer on the base. He took several classes, and he got his pay changed after he took the civil service exam to a physicist. Now, he never got his degree in physics, but he took classes and was able to pass the exam as a physicist, and he retired as a physicist. And during that time, he said that his greatest achievement was starting as a general helper at 76 cents an hour and retiring with the McLean Award. And the McLean Award is a very prestigious award from Dr. McLean, who basically designed the Sidewinder missile in his garage years ago, and he was a big shot. He was also a volunteer during all this stuff. He was a range guide for the petroglyphs for the museum, Mattering Museum. He was also on a board there. The All Faith Chapel, he was a member usher from May 6th. 2 days after he started work there, he found out where the church was, and it was an old building out there by the dog pound. That's where the first church was. Until present, about 73 years. Member of the church. He was a member and on the board of the Desert Community Orchestra, which now they call the IWV Concert Association. And he was, of course, a flautist in the orchestra. You heard it on the tape. He was sent as a still photographer to Mount Ararat to find Noah's Ark with a crew, the last American crew that was allowed through Turkey to go up and climb that mountain. Now, that was their said purpose, but everybody that was there thought they were spying on the Russians. But Dad has written that when they got to the top of that 17,000-foot mountain, it was so hazy they couldn't see Russia. How could they spy on Russia? It was polluted. That was one of the big deals in his life. He came home, and you saw a picture of him with his pack, and we were all excited that Dad came home. In fact, in the next room, you see his boots that he wore climbing Mount Ararat. After he was also a greeter at the city of Ridgecrest for years. He'd sit at the front desk, and people would come in, and he would help them find their way around. After he retired, after 30 years, he joined up with John Parlett, and they had a business called China Lake Systems. And the Navy couldn't figure out how to do small purchases of $2,000, $2,500 or whatever. So John and Dad said, we'll use our credit card, buy them for you, and bill you and give you the electronic equipment. So for 10 years, John and Dad grew a nice little business of buying small purchases for anybody on the base that couldn't buy them with a credit card. Then the Navy figured it out and got their own credit card system, and that went away. So I guess I don't have any scripture or anything else, but he made a big difference with the Department of Defense. He made us all safer because he was able to progress the speed of scoring all the things they do over at China Lake. Went from film, tens of thousands of feet of film processing, to high-speed video, and they could see anything and everything with no blur. Thank you very much.
Good morning. I get to speak about my grandpa from the eyes of the grandkids. My name is Daryl Silberberg, and again, I'm speaking on behalf of the grandchildren. I'm the oldest grandchild, and pretty sure I'm the most favorite. But growing up in Ridgecrest, I was often asked if I was related to George, to which I would absolutely proudly reply, yes. And every single time, the individual would proceed to tell me a story about my grandpa. It normally had something to do with some impact that he had on their life positively. You see, my grandpa was an amazing man. And he had many qualities. First, he was always kind. He was never too important to be nice to people. On many occasions, I've had told stories. On many occasions, people have told me stories of a kind act or a kind word spoken, some of which had a very profound impact on that person's life. My grandpa was also a problem solver. As you heard, the photo lab needed a stable platform to be able to photograph fast-moving objects, and Grandpa came up with mounting a camera on a machine gun turret. Problem solved. The engineers at Knott's needed better footage of the tests in order to better the performance of their weapon systems being created here. Grandpa responded by developing shutter lens stop-action film, which in modern technology is known as super slow motion. These are just two examples of my grandpa's innovative mind and his thinking outside of the box. But my grandpa also believed in giving back to his community, and he wore many hats. And he served as a beacon to the people of Ridgecrest. From coaching young athletes and teaching Sunday school to becoming the CEO and treasurer of credit union, my grandpa selflessly dedicated his time to better this community. But of everything my grandpa did well, he loved his family the most. And all of us have many fond memories of Grandpa George at family get-togethers. And at Christmas, he didn't just give us a gift. He would have us come sit next to him so that he could tell us of how important we were to him and the things that we had done to make him proud that he was our grandpa. He loved his family, but he adored my grandma. And all of us grandchildren wanted this to be known most of all. Because from the beginning, we all have been privileged to witness their love firsthand. It's the perfect love story. And even in his last days, while recovering from hip surgery in his hospital bed, he asked my sister to get him some flowers because he knew that my grandma was going to come and visit him. And when my sister returned with the flowers, Grandpa would not let Jessica write on the card because he had something that he wanted to tell my grandma. And the words he wrote on the card read, "I love you forever." Yeah. And he did. A definition of heritage is that which is inherited from past generations, maintained in the present, and bestowed to the future generations. A kind, humble man who solved complex problems, gave back to his community, loved his family, and adored his wife. George Silberberg was an amazing man. Myself, my brother Jason, sister Jessica, cousins Andrew, Aaron, and Jenna, Kristen, and our spouses are proud to say that he was our grandpa and extremely happy and thankful for the heritage. Thank you very much for coming.
A little shorter than them. Okay. Good morning. My name is Alyssa Auld, and I am George and Pat's great-granddaughter. I am honored to have been asked to represent all of their great-grandchildren today by sharing a few remarks. I didn't know the George Silberberg that a lot of you knew, the scientist, innovator, and award winner. And if I'm being completely honest, I had no idea about many of his achievements until I read his obituary. However, the love story and mention of family that was incorporated in the obituary was not news to me. But honestly, it doesn't surprise me that I didn't know about all of his accomplishments because my Grandpa George never bragged about his awards or his inventions. Instead, he bragged about his family, his wife, and his life's greatest adventures. You see, the George Silberberg that his great-grandchildren got to know and love was the family man who was completely and utterly devoted to my great-grandmother. I have spent many hours with Grandpa George over the past several weeks, going to visit him every opportunity I had. In the time I spent with him in his last days, when he was in and out and sometimes wasn't making sense, Grandma Pat was all he could talk about. Here laid a dying man who, after 73 years of marriage, would briefly come to life every single time my grandma walked into the room. It was like he was 20 years old and falling in love all over again. Each of the great-grandchildren were all blessed to have watched their love grow stronger and stronger our whole lives. And while we did not realize it at the time, Grandma and Grandpa were giving us the greatest gift I can imagine. They were slowly building what would turn into a beautiful legacy for every one of us to continue. For me, it will always be their little house in Inyokern on Nolina Avenue that brings back the fondest memories. For some of my younger cousins, it might be the heritage house that they will remember the most. But no matter the address, their love always created homes that we all will cherish forever. We were all so profoundly blessed to experience the genuine love and commitment my Grandpa George had for his family. As I spent the last few days writing and rewriting this speech, I found myself struggling as I tried to focus just on what Grandpa did and try to separate it from what Grandma did. But I finally realized that you can't separate the two. For example, every Wednesday for most of my life, I have had the opportunity to go to what we lovingly refer to as Grandma Pat Day. Grandma Pat Day is something that I will always cherish, but I was struggling with the fact that we don't call it Grandpa George Day. I thought that maybe I shouldn't focus on it. But then I realized it was an afternoon, regardless of what we called it, those days were spent with both of my great-grandparents. It was an afternoon every week that we spent together discussing school and work, loving on each other, and getting to spend time with Grandma and Grandpa. For me, I am most fond of Wednesdays spent at the Nolina house. I looked forward to the PB&J, chocolate milk, and doo-doo drops for lunch. Snail races, swinging on the tree swing, and occasionally getting to explore the secret garden were all things that magical home offered to us. In addition to Grandma Pat Day, our family would also get together for almost every holiday. On Halloween, before the sunset and trick-or-treating, we would all load in the car and head out to Inyokern to visit Grandma and Grandpa in our costumes. Christmas and Thanksgiving were equally as special. We would cram the entire extended family into the house with tons of food, sitting around the table as Grandpa said grace and talking about what we were most thankful for. As far as my experience goes, the Nolina home will always be a very special place for me, a place where love and family grew stronger and closer with each visit, a place where two people built the most extraordinary life. We all know that change is hard, so when the big move out of Inyokern was approaching, we all worried that nothing would be the same. We thought those magic days will certainly come to an end, but that wasn't what happened at all. Yes, it wasn't exactly the same, but the magic moved to Heritage. This is when I realized that a love so strong does not exist in a space. Rather, it exists between two people, and it travels with them wherever they may go. And so, as it was on Nolina, the time spent at Heritage has been equally as meaningful. Thank you, great-grandma and great-grandpa, for teaching myself, all of the great-grandchildren, and our entire family what it means to build a love, a life, and a legacy from the ground up.
Hi, my name is Addison, and I am the first of 3 great-great-grandchildren of George. My speech is about the greatest, sweetest, and loveliest man in the world. My favorite time with Grandpa George was Wednesday lunches. He would always ask me how school was. School was very important to Grandpa George. He was very smart. He also loved to dog-sit Molly. She would sit up on his lap and he would feed her secret treats. He also loved to hold my little baby cousins, Cohen and Bennett. Bennett is named after Grandpa. His full name is Bennett George. I hope Grandpa is having a good time in heaven. I know I know he misses Grandma. I hope my Grandma Pat's heart will heal and that she knows Grandpa George is still with her.
Now, we have a relative rule that if you travel 1,300 miles, you better get a little mic time. So Phil Cohen representing Dad's sisters. His mother was Julia. Phil.
Thank you. Well, I can't tell you, well, it's a great honor to be here. And I personally try not to get emotional being an engineer because it's not allowed, but this certainly is an exception. I've heard so much today that makes me feel so grateful. I'm here today because my mother, Julia Cohen, originally Julia Silberberg, was George's older sister, and I'm glad to be able to give her remembrances. She will be 100 in Pullman, Washington in October, and I hope Silberbergs can make it to that event. My sister Becky's here. She could stand up, Becky Thorgard. So representing the family, I have two brothers, Ted and Gil, twins. They're Daryl's age, maybe a little older. So I brought some of their thoughts that I've asked for to share with you about George. First, I'll read Sister Julia's recollections of what she gave to my brother Ted and who he sent to me by email. My only brother was named after our mother's brother, George Spalding. As a young boy, George loved to fish and went down to Muddy Brook on Paul Spalding's farm in Woodstock, Connecticut. George also enjoyed family picnics in Woodstock, Connecticut. Boys were special in the Silberberg Spalding family. George received a yearly suit of clothes from the Spalding clothing store in Niagara Falls, New York, which made his sister jealous because they did not get any clothes. And actually, I believe it was the Silberberg clothing store, but my brother, being older than I, sometimes misses a few things. George had a gift for music early in his life. He had a beautiful voice and sang in the church choir in Malden, Massachusetts. His mother, Ethel, enrolled all 5 of her children in music. George had a renowned Greek flute teacher, Mr. Papasakis. George played flute in the 8th grade at the Gates Lane Grammar School in Malden, Massachusetts. George and his sisters also received scholarships at the renowned Longy School of Music of Bard College. The Silberberg Quintet played at weddings and other prominent family events in the Boston and Cambridge, Massachusetts area. Mom sends her condolences and wishes so that she could attend her service. And as I believe it was Daryl or mentioned that they did move to Cambridge, if I got it right, that was so that the family could be closer to the great musical influences that were available, as so many great musicians were coming from Europe. This was pre-World War II. And it was George's mother, Ethel, that said, I've got a great quintet, and if you can give these persons instructions, I can promote the Longy School of Music. And with that, these 5 children were given access to some of the finest music teachers that came over from Europe in pre-World War II. So he had some very good influences in that regard. Moving on to Julia's son, Gil Cohen, one of the twins. I learned of the passing of Uncle George a few days ago. My memories include his visits to Ipswich when we were kids, summering with cousins, which were Silberberg boys and Debbie. He attended our wedding in 1980. I would like to pay tribute to a person, my uncle, who has made a difference. My mother, Julia, said that life is measured by what you do here on earth, and Uncle George lived every bit of that code. We'll miss you. Gil and his spouse, Mary Cohen. And finally, for the messages that I've gotten from my brother, Ted, Gil's twin brother. Hello, Silberbergs. I was saddened with the news of Uncle George passing. Our get-togethers, although infrequent, were always enjoyable and memorable. Pam, his spouse, and I very much enjoyed our visit with you and the rest of the Silberberg family 2 years ago in Ridgecrest, and our get-togethers at family reunions. One of the best reunion was the Mammoth Mountain one, in golfing with the Silberbergs at that time. I'm very proud of my Uncle George, and will also remember Uncle George as a man that was very proud of his family. His spouse, Pam Cohen, who's a native Californian, also says, I was touched with Uncle George's kindness to me for being a newcomer to the family. I fondly remember our reunion at Mammoth Mountain, golfing and fishing for trout. Uncle George was an ace in everything he did. God bless him and give him a nice, cool spot in heaven. That's pretty good. Where we will meet again. Our blessings to him, as we say in California, via con Dios. Thank you for this opportunity, Kevin.
We have absolutely hit the 1 hour mark, so I'm going to wrap things up for all of us. You know, yesterday, I had the opportunity, as being the only kind of kid that has moved away from Ridgecrest, coming back, and we were spending time with Mom. I had the opportunity to look through the treasures in my dad's office, and boy, there are a lot of neat treasures. And there are books, coin collections, there are several audio tapes that are just treasures. You heard one of them, as we've made reference, of Dad playing in 1966 with a visiting symphony, and they asked George to play along with that. And as a professional, I think professional flautist, he hit it out of the park. So we have that recording, and we were so glad to put it on that video. So I think one of the best things I found yesterday also was that my dad eulogizing his dad in Ipswich, Massachusetts. And it's a very rough audio. It's raining terribly. We got to hear his four sisters and he play some of the music that they played as kids. But the very special thing was my dad eulogizing his father. And what he said was very profound. I think this was in 1978. In this recording, it contained, like I said, a short concert of my dad and his sisters. And then my dad was elected to share his thoughts about his father. And he went right to Matthew 13. If you know anything about Matthew 13, it's the parable of the sower that went out and seeds fell. And some seeds fell on the ground and they were scorched by the sun. Some seeds fell on the ground and they fell on soil, but the thorns choked them out. But still some seeds fell on good soil and produced grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. And I thought of that, and my dad stated at his father's funeral that the goal of his parents were to provide a very fertile soil for he and his four sisters to flourish and to better themselves, no matter what life throws at them. And I thought, you know, as I really think about this, that's exactly what my mom and dad were all about. They wanted to also, and it was their goal in life, was to provide fertile soil for us four kids to make the most out of our life. And what Dad spoke about so many years ago that his father was all about was alive and well for us. And as we reflect back, they were such a positive influence and provided that fertile ground for us to make everything we could out of what life. And we went in so many different directions. But one thing was for sure is that we made the most out of what we were given, a fertile childhood in a wonderful home with two loving parents that had high expectations. Our expectations, like Tim said, it's not if you're going to college, it's where. And we went to, they all chose San Diego State. I don't know what's wrong with that, but I guess they never saw Point Loma. Point Loma overlooks the ocean and a wonderful place for me to spend many years. San Diego State's out in the valley, and it's like, I know where I'm going, right, Coach? Finally, I came across a huge gem, and my mom's been receiving some wonderful cards this week, and thank you for those. But Mrs. DePaul wrote, And she said, I'm not very good at writing, so I like to quote famous people. And Mrs. DePaul, I asked her if I could read this, and she said, absolutely, and she loves this. And this is from Henry Ward Beecher, and just wrapping up today, wrapping up our thoughts on our dad and what's been said. Listen carefully to what Henry Ward Beecher wrote. When the sun goes below the horizon, he is not set. The heavens glow for a full hour after his departure. And when a great and good man sets, the sky of the world is luminous long after he is out of sight. Such a man cannot die out of this world. When he goes, he leaves behind him and much of himself. I can't say it any better. So on behalf of the family, again, we thank you so much for being here and listening to us. And as we reflect, this is wonderful for us, and we want it to continue. And this wonderful church has extended not only this facility, but next door is a reception hall, and we have a wonderful lunch there. And we'd like to continue that celebration of George's life with comments to my mom and to the family, and as long as you can hang out, we would love that. Taylor, has she made it to the piano? Taylor has made it to the piano. Taylor's music has been a complete joy to her great-grandparents, especially my dad, growing up in a musical family, to have someone so accomplished following in their footsteps. She's going to play for a little bit, and we'll enjoy that. And then as she finishes, we'll make our way next door to the reception. So on behalf of the family, thank you again for traveling near or far. And we loved our dad so much. We kind of have 55 years between these two pictures. And so much happened between those years, before and during that time. We loved him dearly. He had a tremendous influence on our life and for the many generations going forward. So again, thank you so much for coming. And Taylor, take it away. Thank you.